for, first of all, writing another book of poetry, and for bringing his poems into the world. It's always such a pleasure and a privilege to read Stuart's poetry. And also thank you for asking me to host this evening. In true Socratic tradition, I see my job here as a kind of midwife, rather than as the voice that will dominate. So Stuart is going to read some of his poetry from the collection, and we will have a discussion about the poetry, and then we will also open up for questions. I'll just say a few words just about my first impression on reading the manuscript, and then I will ask Stuart to talk a little bit about the book. I mean, I think one of the things that I really love about Stuart's poetry is his attention to form. You know, with the development of free verse, form is always a part of poetry. You cannot, even if you write free verse, your poetry still has to have form. And often many poets, contemporary poets, forget that, and they think poetry is just prose chopped up into shorter sentences. But Stuart is keenly aware of form, of rhythm. Many of his poems read like songs, and there's a lyricism in all of his poems that I think also creates in the reader a sense of reverie. And I think that is a remarkable gift, and it's I think one of the reasons that Stuart is such a unique voice and an important voice in the South African poetry scene. And I think he also deals with themes that are universal. I mean, so much writing in South Africa has sort of regarded as unimportant if it's not political. And again, I think that is a mistake. Poetry can be political, of course, but it should always speak beyond the here and the now. And I think one of the things that Stuart also does in recognizing the importance of art to speak to us across the years is his learning and his scholarship, his reference to Greek poetry, to ancient traditions, and that again appears in his writing. So there is also a deep philosophical and elements to his poetry where he speaks of the importance of issues that speak to all of us across the years. So for those of you who haven't read his latest collection, I know that you're in for an absolute treat. So I'm going to ask Stuart, the book is divided into 5 sections, and so I'm just going to start off by asking you just to speak to that, how you decided to divide the book, if the thematic elements in the different sections, and so on.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. It was initially a sadder book than it is now, but after my dad's death I had to choose not to continue down that path. I divided the manuscript into 5 sections, which I hope led from a place of some sadness towards a place of happiness. The first section is the general section, as is the last section. In between, I write about preoccupations of mine. There's a section on death, a section on animal life, and a section on other cultures or travel. And I hope there's an arc which comes across it, with poems having references to other sections, leading to a place of happiness.
Well, thank you. One of the elements that I found is a kind of theme in many of the poems that from all the different sections is a sense of a different world, a kind of possible world in which might be happier, but it's often linked to memory. So sometimes memory can be a marker for a past world that's lost, and that is brings both happiness and sadness. And then also sometimes the notion of possible worlds, of future worlds, other worlds that we can also aspire to. So there's a working between memory, loss, and place that for me was also quite a thematic element in the poems. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. An early influence on me was Verlaine and Rimbaud. I can't find the reference now, but I think they were arguing that a factory could be more clearly seen as a Turkish temple. That's not the path I followed, but the idea of seeing something as new, removed from the normalcy that hides it, has remained very strong. Sometimes I consider other worlds as a way of removing the dullness from this world, but yes, there's also a strong sense of the past, of trying to maintain the past in words.
Yes, and also the importance of art for preserving the past. I mean, I don't know if you were influenced by poets like Keats and Yeats, because there was definitely, certainly in your poem about Byzantium, the echo of Yeats was definitely there, and even Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn. And I was wondering if I was reading into that, or if that was something that was also hovering in the background.
I think
for
that
you.
Is that Yeats' artifice into eternity. There's a dissatisfaction with the world as it is, and wanting a desire to write it better, that it can be better, at least in art.
Are you hopeful that art can be the best of us, or is there always that worry that the human will somehow mess it up? Because one of the other nice things that I liked about your poetry was the way that the animal world is often played. Animals are often part of, your relationship with your cats comes through very, very well in the poetry. But sometimes the animal world seems to, again, speak to another world beyond human language. You speak of animals' ability to experience suffering and grief, but not actually have the words for it.
Yes.
And maybe you can just speak to...
Yes, it fascinates me that there are these other worlds, these other minds living around us that we can't reach, that we mustn't anthropomorphize, but that we should try and reach towards, to try and understand. And I do find that fascinating. Yes, a constant source of aggravation as well as possibilities.
I mean, in a sense, poetry, like all arts, also deals with the ineffable, because what we're trying to gesture towards, what we're trying to express, always lies beyond the literal. So, in a sense, there's always that sense of ineffability, the kind of phenomenology that we can't quite put into words, but which all art somehow tries to capture.
Yes.
It's there for us as well.
Yes. Yes, I'm frustratedly aware of how what I'm aiming for doesn't always come through in the words, that the words aren't always suitable for the inchoate ideas that I have.
Yes, I think that's the general struggle that the artist has across all genres, I think. So, can we ask you to read? Stuart said he's going to read us a poem from each section, and I think it would be nice if you can read a poem, and then we can talk about it. I mean, I also don't want to be very strict about, us talking and then opening for questions. If people are moved by the poem that Stuart reads, then people want to comment while we're chatting. I think that's also, we can have more of a conversation than a sort of strict question and answer section right at the end. Flexibility, I think, is also important. So, Stuart, again, hand over to you.
The first section begins with a quote from Proust: "The universe is true for all of us and similar to each of us." And Wilderness is then the first poem in the first section, beginning with an epigraph from David Attenborough: "People who accuse us of putting in too much violence should see what we leave on the cutting room floor." Wilderness. We separate the trash these days and use a well point on the garden, planted now for birds and insects flitting through the changeful air. We read of ice collapsed in waves and turn lights off when not in use. We take tote bags when going shopping, all the usual things you do. But there are times, observing nature's ways, I'd sooner pave it all and end these rounds of life and death in something pleasant like a plaza. Birds would fly, or forms of birds, as if their golden feathers felt the winds, and marble beasts would pace the land below, their eyes of jewels. Lions would roar like blood still flowed, but drinking deer not start in fright, and whales would rise from burnished oceans, ageless under wheeling skies.
Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write this poem? I mean, there's so many interesting themes going on that I'll just...
It's about my ambivalence towards nature and the universe. But I'm horrified by the destruction of the natural world, but at the same time horrified by the natural world itself, its apparent hopelessness. The epigraph is from David Attenborough, and I admire him very much for his conservation efforts, but I can't watch his programs. I can't reconcile myself to the morality of non-intervention. Underlying it all, I think, is the question of a godless universe. But I'll say more about that with another poem. And it is quite Yeatsian, as you said. He speaks about the artifice of eternity and sailing to Byzantium. As I escape into art, so might all creation in this poem. It's in iambic tetrameter, which suits the conversational tone, I think. There's an example of how I try to provide variety in the third stanza, where two tetrameters break into a group of 2 feet and 2 of 3 feet, with the first group of 3 running across 2 lines. Yes, in imagery I try to appeal to the senses, since we approach the world through our senses, and they tie a poem to reality, however vague its abstruse its ideas might be.
Yes, I mean, I was also struck when reading your poems that the phenomenological aspect of them comes through very, very clearly. So in many of your poems are about things that you see and things that you hear, things that you smell. I mean, in one of the poems, I forget the title of it, but you talk about the poverty of our language in describing our senses that are not sight or hearing. You know, smell, we have very few words that really capture our sense of smell. So your poetry is rooted in the sensual and sensuous experience. Even as so many of your poems are also very philosophical, you know, talk about larger themes. And again, I think that movement between the situatedness, the experience in the here and now, I think it's also one of the important things about poetry, because you're not writing a philosophical treatise, right? So the poems should never just be about ideas. In fact, I'm reminded, as I'm talking to you now, of the poem by Archibald MacLeish, Ars Poetica, where he says, a poem should not mean, but be. We should often just try and focus on the image and what the image can convey rather than simply the thought or the idea, because poetry is always situated in the phenomenological experience. And I think you do that really beautifully, and there's always a delicacy of touch in your poetry. You know, you never hit, even though this poem is about, you know, nature's red in tooth and claw and the destruction of the natural world, there's a humor as well. I mean, I think, you know, in something pleasant like Plaza, clearly there's a humor and an irony there. The use of rhythm as well in these rounds of life and death, I think that also brings out the perhaps the inevitability of death and the natural world. I mean, it's interesting because when I was reading some of your other poetry, I also wanted to ask you whether you were influenced by Wordsworth. I mean, you spoke about the godlessness of the natural world, the absence of God. But in other poems, I'm almost reminded of a kind of pantheism, where you do seem to hint at something more divine in the creation of nature. So are these two elements working against one another, or is there a tension in that in the poetry between, I'll call it a pessimism, even though a godless world is not necessarily a pessimism, but between this kind of pessimism and optimism about nature?
Definitely. Much of my poem, it underlies a lot of my poetry, coming back to Epicurus in the 3rd or 4th century BC. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then where does evil come from? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? But at the same time, I can't reconcile myself to a godless universe that seems then a cosmic joke played on us by no one. So that tension does underlie a lot of my poetry.
Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. I think. Can I just ask you, before you carry on reading poems from the other sections, the poem that begins the collection is not in any of the sections. Is that a kind of floating poem? Why did you write it in that way?
That was initially when I sent an earlier form of it to Fanula Darling. She thought it would be a good poem to start with, and then I thought it would be a good one to separate from the sections and just have it as sort of a non-religious prayer for hope for the whole collection.
Right. Will you read it for us, actually?
Oh, I wrote a few lines. For the lonely and lost and in pain, for the hopeless and soon to be slain, for the sick and the sad and insane, oh, I wrote a few lines. They're not words that will banish their fear, or the sorrow for all they held dear. Perhaps they're not words they will hear, but I wrote a few lines. Where we'll be together again, with the spirits of those we knew then, although they're beyond mortal ken, and it's just a few lines, and only a small thing to give, and soon we must leave them and live. So I'm hoping that you will forgive that it's just a few lines.
Thank you. I think it's such a beautiful poem. And again, it speaks of the again, that's sort of, I think in many of your poems there's this double sense of optimism about what art can do, that we can reach those who have passed in poetry, but then it's not enough, and then we have to also leave them and move into the world.
Yes, yes.
So poetry is both capturing a loss, but also the mark of loss.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank
Never
you.
be enough.
So you want to read us the poem from the second section, Oceans of the Moon, and that's about, it starts off with a poem about death.
This was written for my father. It's called After the Funeral. The sky is blue beyond the sliding doors, with tufts of clouds dispersing as they pass above the chattering world. As on the days we go to Fisher Beach, and Dad would take us diving off the rocks, to swim with goggles over sunlit sand, and shoals of tiny fish would flicker by, or days he'd spend when still a boy, with friends along the river's marshy banks, as Platana watched from shallow pools, and life held secrets yet to be explored amid the rustling reeds, with parents waiting at adventure's end. Or days when children laugh again outside and hurry on, excited by the life that lies ahead, as tufts of clouds disperse, and there's no one to tell them what there was.
Was this a poem about a particular memory that you have?
Yes, it was taken from memories from my brother's childhood with my dad at Fisher. And he would take us swimming along the rocks, waited on the rocks. And then his childhood in Pinelands, when the Lisbeck River hadn't been canalised yet, it wound down through small wetlands down Pinelands where he used to play. Yes.
I also like the way the poem connects your childhood with your father's childhood in a way of, in a sense, unifying your life, tying your life to his.
I would say yes, and then looking ahead to when there'll be none of us here, and there'll be no worrying about any of this, which is both positive and negative.
I mean, again, I don't know if there was a Yeatsian influence on this particular poem, but maybe your general influence of Yeats. It just the structure of the poem reminds me of Yeats's poems about the swans at Cool Park, where he also talks about it ends with the time when the swans have flown away.
Yes.
And of course, there's also the water imagery, which the blue of both the sky and the water. So there's this unity between the land and the sky, heaven and earth, as it were. And you begin with the sky. The sliding doors.
It came about from me lying on my couch, gazing out through glass doors at the clouds dispersing overhead, and yes.
Right. I also read it as a reference to the sliding doors, the sky as a door to a portal to a world beyond the earth.
Yes. Yes, there's a sense of going out. We went out. My dad went out. The children in the future will go out.
Yes.
Into the sea, the water, the sky.
I mean, often, not always, but sometimes, poems about death are very heavy, and they're connected with the earth and burial. This poem is not. It's a poem about water and light, and it's quite expansive, and the mind is taken away from the present. So in that sense, it's. I mean, I don't know if you think of yourself as a hopeful poet, but there is a kind of hope, even as it's a poem about death.
Thank you. I was aiming for something like that. I didn't want it to be morose, too somber. because my dad always wanted, as I said, me to write happier poems, and so I wanted it to be full of light and air.
I think that definitely comes across. I mean, there's a lyricism as well in the writing, which I think keeps it very light, which is very difficult to do. And it's another thing that you do so well, I think, is the lyricism can both capture grief, and it doesn't make light of the grief, and yet it also brings a light to the poem. And I think, again, that's a remarkable ability that you have.
Thank you.
So, and that comes through in many of the poems. I don't know if anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comments at this point. I said we're happy to have a kind of conversation. I mean, I'm speaking on Stuart's behalf, but otherwise we can just kind of continue and leave the questions for later. Should we do that then? Should we? Yes.
I guess I was going to ask, do you want to use the mic? Oh, it's okay, I'll just speak loudly if everyone can hear. Just going to ask, do you think poetry then always has to lean into a sort of hopefulness, or can it land where it leaves us in the dust of it?
Oh, definitely. Definitely, it can leave us in the dust, and some of my early ambitions for the book would have been more along those lines. I just had to turn back from that to a more hopeful type of poetry, because I'd gone as far as I could after my dad died along those lines. Yes, but no, I definitely think it can, yes, leave us in the dust, and should do so sometimes. Thank you.
Thanks. So, would you like to read us the third poem on the third section? In this section, Birds in Ancient Paintings, they make poems about animals and especially Stuart's cats.
I put the animal poems in a separate section, not because I wanted the emotions to be separate necessarily, just for the reader's ease. This is called For Whom There Is No Grief. I grieve for those for whom there is no grief, though it brings no comfort or relief to them, and little happiness to me. But there it is. Because they were as we are now, they were alive and now are not, and we will soon be held by urn or plot or scattered to the winds. Perhaps that's so, or partly so. But what a snake might know and see and feel through serpent's eyes and skin must be so unalike, so unakin to human life, there might seem little room for empathy despite the common doom. Did I say snake? Moles then, or ducks, all things that fear or are content, things on wings and paws and fins, things that kill each other, things for which I would have had another end, all for which there is no grief, no graveside tears or comforting belief in afterlives, both cats and humans left alone without concern, none left bereft. I grieve for those for whom there is no grief, because it brings no comfort or relief, because I can't call on them to rise and breach the walls of paradise.
Thank you. I'm interested in the structure of the poem because it's written as rhyming couplets. Tell us about your choice for this particular structure.
That's unusual for me. I don't usually write in rhyming couplets. It started coming out like that, and it's one of the quickest poems I've written. Most poems I write quickly aren't very good, but I was very pleased with this one. And I think the rhyming couplets, I think part of the speed was to do with the rhyming couplets, that each line suggested the next. And I thought it was effective for the poem, even though I was surprised that it came out like that.
Yes, because often rhyming couplets are about, there's a lightness to them, and you wouldn't expect a poem about grief and loss to be written in rhyming couplets. But it definitely works. I mean, it's not trivial at all, and one gets a sense again of maybe because you're right, for whom there is no grief. So there's this sort of teasing between. On the one hand, there is if we know an animal that has died, we have grief and loss, but the animals themselves feel no pity for one another. I mean, perhaps elephants are different. I wanted to ask you, just the last line, and again, I might be reading too much into that, but it sounds like in his attitude of Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure to own degree. Was there a deliberate nod to Coleridge?
Not deliberate, but he is a poet I like very much,
Yes.
so it might well have come through there.
Right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can I ask you, Stuart? I read it while you were reading it, and I noticed that yes, you chose to write with rhymes, but when you read it, you kind of you didn't read it like rhyming. Why this choice?
I thought the rhymes are there, and then I followed the rhythm of the words, I think, allowing people to pick up on the rhymes as they wanted to. I think so. They provided a structure for me to move from one line to the next. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
I know nothing about poetry. Let me start off by saying that. You mentioned that normally when you write something or something comes about quite quickly, that is not very good. I've got a little bit of experience with criticizing myself quite heavily in what it is that I do. Doesn't matter which aspect of my life it is. How do you determine that something is good or not? Well, for you.
For you. I usually put it aside for a few days or a few weeks, and then come back to it while I'm writing it. It's very hard to judge whether it's what I want or not, because I'm so involved in what's happening, and I'm seeing what I want to see. If I leave it for a couple of weeks, I can come back and see it almost as another person. And if it doesn't work for me then, if I write it quickly, it usually ends up being at too high a pitch, not shrill, but something approaching shrillness. The parts don't work together as I would like. So it's a matter of waiting until my mind's clear again, and I can read it almost as a new poem. And then, as I would read someone else's poem and see if I thought something worked or not, it can then appear to me quite quickly what I've done wrong, which was completely hidden to me before.
May I ask a follow-up? Has it happened to you that you've written something, gone back to it later, you didn't like it, and yet when somebody else read it, they were blown away?
not not blown away, but I have come to like some poems more because of people's positive responses. Not poems I thought were bad, but ones I thought were decent, but you have had a good response. Yes, that one, Indian Hawthorne, that was just raised in my own estimation because of other people's responses to it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do you not sometimes find though that writing a poem quickly can be good in the sense that sometimes if you think too much about what you're doing, you can cripple yourself, and then you just can't write at all. So there has to be in sort of more of a kind of if the superego is too involved, then often it stifles creativity.
Yes, definitely. But I found the best way for me to avoid that is to try and concentrate on one line at a time, to have a plan of the poem and then proceed slowly down through the poem, and then seeing how, as I proceed, seeing how the lines balance against one another, and removing ones which had seemed good, which in combination with others no longer do. I would love to be able to write more quickly, to be able to remove myself, my superego for the whole poem. I find that very difficult.
Do you find there's a particular method that you use, or does it differ? I mean, do you find yourself sometimes led by a particular rhythm, for example, and that dictates the poem, or is it sometimes an idea, or sometimes an image?
It's often I search for some kernel of inspiration, some volta, like in a sonnet, something which will spark life into the lines. And then once I have that idea, I proceed quite slowly, so as not to overwhelm myself, because in the past I did tend to overwhelm myself by trying to write too quickly. I try and concentrate on a small piece of poem at a time.
But do you begin with have you ever said to yourself, I'm going to write a sonnet today, or does it develop into a sonnet or a banal?
I do, for something like a sonnet, it would generally be a conscious choice, but others like the rhymed couplets that just came about as I was writing. But yes, sometimes it is a conscious decision.
Right. I'm aware of time, and I do want you to read the poems that you have. So should we move on, and then we can always come back to questions later. So we're going to read a poem from the fourth section.
It's called Cordoba, which is the old Islamic word for Cordoba. At times I'd make my way to Cordoba, or Cordoba as it might be, the Taifa left unconquered, or the Caliphate unfallen. Worshippers would kneel amid the columns of the mosque. The library would hold its volumes too, with further knowledge gained in further years, as students came from lands of other faiths to learn its wisdom. I wouldn't change the city that it is, you understand. Just give the slip to time, no more than that, and live a double day with people risen from another history. I travelled to Byzantium, its walls unbreached, and it the lord of spacious lands and seas. as Cordoba would look across the straits to see Tangier still held the south, and in Byzantium priests would chant, and incense burn, and voices rise as one towards the dome, towards the glowing windows, rising to the promise of the heavens.
Again, that image of rising to the sky and the heavens. You're extremely learned, and references to the past, to Greek mythology. I know there's a poem about Abelard and Heloise. I was very pleased to, this is just an aside, to see that the book that you used was written by William Levitan, whom I actually know. So I was quite delighted to see that you used his book. Tell us a little bit about the sense of history and how it works for you, because it also functions as a kind of mythology, right?
Yes. Cordoba and Istanbul, Byzantium, on either side of the Mediterranean, represent the ebb and flow of cultures, the cities that pass between Christianity and Islam. I tend to think in terms of historical areas of interest: Rome's here, Parthia, Sasanian Persia here, China here. And it's historically sad to see the territory of the Roman Empire divided into adversarial Christian and Muslim parts. And I had the thought that there's not enough world for all the history I'd like to explore that, and sometimes but for one or two small changes, the world might be quite different, which fascinates me, as I think it does many people. I feel I ought to be able to step into an unconquered Byzantium, and to some extent in imagination we can. And I think with scientific advances we'll be able to do so much further in the future. Artificial realities. But it's also, again, concerned with seeing, again, breaking away from the dullness of routine. As I say in the poem, I don't want them to vanish as they are. And by seeing them as they might have been, I think we can enrich their presence.
Okay, interesting, because I was thinking that your sense of the ancient world is that it enriches our presence. I mean, there's a sense when I'm reading that there's a kind of sense of loss at the departure of the sort of the greats, the Ajax, and we don't have heroes anymore. Is that a theme or hidden theme in the poetry at all?
I think history, like art, allows us to engage with difficult subjects in relative peace. That's part of the attraction. I certainly do have a sense of frustration at having missed out on various ancient worlds. Although I know that's me romanticizing, and I mean, if I did live there, well, there'd be no modern anesthetics for one. But they do enrich our presence.
Yes, I think that is true, and unfortunately we read in the classics less and less.
And I think seeing ourselves historically as someone might, 1,000 years from now, they might look back as we do on medieval Paris and wonder what it was like to live in those times, people will look back on us and wonder what it is. And if we can bring that idea into our own lives, that we bring the richness of history into our own everyday lives by seeing it from the future.
It's also, of course, a very Yeatsian idea, which I think, again, sorry, I'm probably speaking about Yeats too much.
He's a big influence.
But yeah, I think that's also in your sense of, your vision of history, I think that comes through as well. And then the final section, and then I think we can open it up for questions afterwards. The sun, the moon, and ripe cucumbers. I think that's such a wonderful title.
This is called Cucumbers, so it's the semi-title poem. Consider cucumbers. I have one here, and slice it through its emerald skin to smell the freshness, crisp and cool. I cut it through again and hold the slice towards the window, seeing fibers in the glowing flesh as if beneath the microscope, with nutrients drawn from soil and sun and irrigation, nature and humanity in harmony, carried here across 3,000 years to burst between my teeth, or slice in neat white sandwiches, or with tomatoes in a bowl, to eat when summer's at its height and friends are gathered, yes, and laughing.
Why did you decide to end the collection with this? Oh, it's not the final poem. It's okay. No, I thought it was the final poem, but it's not. When you tell the audience the reference to ripe cucumbers, because it's in the book, but it's not obvious.
It comes from a poem, an ancient Greek poem by Praxilla, who was a poet from the secondary, it was an important city, but not one of the major cities, called Sicyon. It became the great center of Greek art. And her fragment is quite painterly. I'll read it for you. She lived in the 5th century BC. The fairest thing I leave is the light of the sun, and next the bright stars in the face of the moon, and also ripe cucumber and apples and pears. It was sometimes criticized in the ancient world for being absurd, for pairing something as mundane as cucumbers with the glory of the sun and moon. But I think the grouping produces a powerful impression of life. The words are spoken by Adonis from the underworld, of what he misses from his previous life. I think it produces a powerful impression of the variety of life. I first read it at university and it's stayed with me ever since. And especially the last section, I hoped to have something of that brightness and vitality and freshness.
And again, it links the phenomenological experience of the everyday with something beyond it, which I think is, again, the overboard theme of the poem. And I like the way that you incorporated the sun into your poem about cucumbers. It wouldn't have been possible to have grown without the soil and without the sun. So there's a causal link as well. But the light in the cucumber, I think, is it just glows off the page actually when one reads it. I do want to leave some time for questions, so we've only got about 7 or 8 minutes. But are you happy just to take questions from the audience?
If anyone has questions, certainly.
I mean, I think this is just a statement, but I love these 2 lines going, I grieve for those for whom there is no grief because it brings no comfort or relief. And it's such an opposite idea, because the point of grieving is to find comfort and relief. And I don't even know if I have a question, because I'm not even sure. Like, I would love you just to explain or tell me a little bit more about that?
It's just, I suppose, it was the feeling that there's nothing else to do to, what's the word, honour the loss. Yes, but grieve, even though it's useless.
I'm not so sure why. I don't know why this poem stands out. So I think it's because it's so unlike your other poems because of the rhyming couplets. Like it kind of hits you a little bit harder because it's such a simple statement, and the rhythm and the rhyming of it makes you think it's like you're expecting something, but it's not. It's so poignant and still. I really love it.
Thank you.
I also like the repetition at the end, which is something you do with quite a lot of your poems, which also adds to the sense that there's a musicality in the lyricism.
Thank you.
Yes.
I don't have a question. This is more of a statement. I flip and hate cucumbers. Up until 5 minutes ago. So now, if you want to piss me off, give me a cucumber sandwich. Let me tell you, that's a friendship ender right there. And after listening to how you romanticize a cucumber, if I can put it so bluntly, I'm going to look at them in a whole new way. As a matter of fact, there's a greengrocer nearby because I actually feel like having some this evening.
That's
That's
the power.
never happened to me before.
The power of poetry, right? To
The power
really
of
see the
poetry.
world differently.
Yeah.
Contra ordin.
Yes. Douglas, did you?
I was going to say, you mentioned Keats and you mentioned Wordsworth and you mentioned Coleridge. What about poor Mr. Shelley?
Him too. Yes. Yes, I like some of his poems very much. Well, that sounds. That's too little. He's been a big influence on me. Possibly less so than Keats because he's less visual in his writing, but he is a big influence as well. Keats, Yeats, Rimbaud, however different, Cavafy, however different they are, they're all very, one can picture their poetry more easily, I think, than you tend to with Shelley. So I think they've been a bigger influence, however much I like Shelley as a poet.
Coming up on the outside is Lord Byron, who is, of all of them, the great prosodist. Much the greater prosodist than all the rest of the Romantics. And that seems to be the central element of your music, is prosody.
Yes.
So,
I've read also a lot of Byron and his rhymes and his wit and intelligence. His prosody is remarkable. Yes. A lot of other poets, English poets like Elizabeth Bishop or Christopher Marlowe, have all also, their images have greatly influenced me.
Archie?
I keep thinking of Ithaca. Somehow that it's the experience of the journey and not necessarily the destination, but the fact that you set out creates all these experiences. And I think the historical roads, I guess as you travel down them and research some of these things, you are enriched yourself as you write these poems and discover things too.
Yes. Yes, the journey itself is the goal, really. Yes, I've learned a lot along the way.
talking of journeys, we are almost out of time. I am going to ask you to read the last poem in the collection. I've heard it before, and it's a favorite of mine. I think it's such a beautiful poem, and it's called Into Town. So if you wouldn't mind reading that, and then we'll end, and then I'm sure Stuart will be happy to take any questions and chat to you after the official reading. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks. Into Town. It's set on Nelson Mandela Boulevard. A line of palms divides the motorway, and when it's windy and the sun is bright, the palm fronds buck and sway and catch the light, like waves that glimmer in the wind-blown bay, or plastic shaped to somebody's design, in buildings that appear as cars descend towards the town, around the mountain bed and down, past fronds that change as if a sign. But what awaits is not what lies behind, and drivers' spirits lift. Not knowing why, they feel the promises of days gone by, when they might travel into town to find a holiday's amusement with their friends, or glimpse a time when such a thing might be. Yet here, between the mountains and the sea, their lives might yet be turned to other ends. Palm fronds buck and sway and catch the light. The day is windy and the sun is bright.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for gracing us with your beautiful poetry.
Thank you.
I've got one question.
Oh, yes.
So, Stuart, as a poet, you're going into history. If you thought yourself to be a historian, would you think you would then relate to poetry in the same way? In other words, if you came from the base of being a historian.
It's a regret of mine that I'm not a historian. I think I wouldn't. I hope I would still be interested in poetry. I think I still would be. I think I would come to it from a similar place, but probably a place of greater knowledge. I'd already have the knowledge rather than having to go and find it. But that is something I would love to have been.
They could run parallel.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
Please.
Why did you choose that poem for the last one?
Because it's hopeful and it made me happy. Yes, it was a poem of hope for the future for everyone. Thank you.
Just a couple of announcements from our side. First of all, thank you to our wine sponsor, Spear, and thank you to Ushanga Press and Malku, who couldn't be here today. Please join us tomorrow, Friday the 5th of December. I'm going to be launching Bitter Comics, Sketchbook and Journals by Antoine Kenemia and Conrad Waters. They will be in conversation with Sean O'Toole. And then on Saturday, we have a really fun kids party. So if you have children and nieces or nephews, whatever, please bring them. It's starting at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
There are refreshments and
Maybe